My husband's family treated my father's funeral like a nuisance until the lawyer revealed the secret patent that owned half their industry. Mary stood trembling near her father's portrait, tears streaming down her face, but instead of receiving comfort from her husband, she heard the distinct sound of stifled laughter from the pews behind her. I can't believe she's crying over a man who died with nothing, her mother-in-law Tanya whispered loudly to the other women, checking her watch with dramatic annoyance. They didn't even pretend to mourn. They sat in the back row on their phones, gossiping and giggling as if they were at a boring brunch rather than a funeral. Mary clasped her hands until her knuckles turned white, feeling entirely alone and humiliated by the people who were supposed to be her family. But when the family lawyer stood up to read the will, the snickering in the church instantly died. The revelation of a secret fortune worth millions drained the color from Tanya's face, and the specific poison pill clause in the trust would leave them all begging Mary for forgiveness. Before we continue with Mary's satisfying revenge, please hit like and subscribe for more compelling drama stories. I want to know, where are you watching from today? Chicago, London, Jamaica, or Nairobi? Comment your city below so I can see. The air conditioning in the small, weathered chapel had surrendered to the heat an hour ago, leaving the sanctuary thick with the scent of melting beeswax and wilting carnations. Mary Robbins stood alone at the front of the aisle, her fingers trembling as they traced the edge of the polished oak casket. Inside lay Vick, the only man who had ever loved her without condition or caveat. To the world, he was a quiet retiree who drove a 10-year-old truck and wore flannel shirts year-round. To Mary, he was the bedrock of her existence, a man of few words but infinite patience. Now, staring at his peaceful face, she felt an anchor dragging her chest downward, a grief so heavy she thought her knees might buckle under the weight of it. She instinctively reached out her left hand, searching for the reassuring grip of her husband, Eric. Her fingers met only empty air. Mary turned her head slightly, blinking through the haze of tears. Eric wasn't beside her. He was standing 3 feet away, furiously typing on his smartphone, his brow furrowed, not in sorrow, but in irritation. He adjusted his silk tie, checking his reflection in the glass, covering a scripture verse on the wall, seemingly oblivious to his wife's silent plea for support. Honestly, Eric, I don't know why we couldn't have just done a cremation, a sharp, familiar voice cut through the hushed reverence of the room. This place smells like a basement that hasn't seen sunlight since the Nixon administration. Mary flinched. Tanya Robbins, her mother-in-law, swept into the front row like a queen inspecting a particularly disappointing hotel room. She was dressed in a black designer suit that cost more than the entire funeral service, her blonde hair coiffed into an immovable helmet of perfection. She fanned herself aggressively with a funeral program, making a show of her discomfort. "Mom, please," Eric muttered, finally looking up from his phone, though his tone lacked any real reprimand. "Keep it down." "I'm just stating facts," Tanya hissed, though her whisper was loud enough to carry to the mourners seated 3 rows back. She gestured disdainfully at the floral arrangement atop the casket. "Look at those flowers. Carnations, really? It looks like a grocery store clearance sale. I told you we should have ordered the lilies, but no, Mary insisted on keeping it simple. There's simple and then there's cheap." "Dad liked carnations," Mary whispered, her voice cracking. "He grew them in his garden." Tanya rolled her eyes, a gesture so practiced it felt violent. "He liked them because they're weeds, dear, but fine, it's done now. Just tell me this isn't going to drag on. I have a reservation at Le Jardin at 2, and if we're late, they'll give our table to tourists." Mary felt a hot flush of shame rise up her neck, warring with her grief. She looked back at Eric, begging her with her eyes to defend her, to defend the memory of the man lying just a few feet away. Eric met her gaze for a split second, then looked down at his shoes. "It'll be quick, Mary," Eric said softly, but he wasn't comforting her, he was reassuring his mother. The pastor knows we're on a tight schedule. A ripple of laughter erupted from the pew directly behind them. Mary froze. She turned to see Tanya's entourage, 2 of her bridge club friends and Eric's younger sister, huddled together.
They weren't looking at the casket, they were looking at a phone screen, giggling at something undoubtedly unrelated to the somber occasion. In the stark quiet of the chapel, their mirth was as jarring as a gunshot. "Can you believe she wore those shoes?" one of them whispered, nodding towards a distant cousin of Mary's. More stifled giggles followed. Mary felt a physical ache in her chest that had nothing to do with mourning. Her father had been a man of immense dignity. He worked 40 years as a machinist, saving every penny, fixing his own roof, and teaching Mary that character was defined by how you treated people who could do nothing for you. And here, at his final rest, he was being treated as an inconvenience, a budget item to be managed and disposed of so the Robbins family could get to their lunch reservation. "He was a good man," Mary said, her voice trembling but gaining a sudden, sharp edge. She wasn't speaking to anyone in particular, but the words hung in the air. Tanya sighed loudly, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "He was a simple man, Mary. Let's not rewrite history. He fixed engines. It's fine, honest work, but let's not pretend we're burying a head of state." She leaned in closer to Eric, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial stage whisper. "Did you speak to that man in the gray suit near the back? I think it's the VP of Acquisitions from Chaotic Industries. Why is he here?" Eric perked up, his apathy vanishing instantly. "Wait, strictly the VP? I didn't see him." "Go check," Tanya commanded, shooing his son away with a manicured hand. "If it is him, you need to say hello. You've been trying to get a meeting with him for months. Hand him a card." "Now?" Eric whispered, glancing nervously at the pastor who was approaching the pulpit. "It's networking," Tanya snapped. "Your father-in-law won't mind. He's not going anywhere." Mary watched in disbelief as her husband, the man who had vowed to cherish her in sickness and health, stepped away from her side. He didn't take her hand, he didn't offer a tissue. Instead, he smoothed his jacket and slipped quietly towards the back of the church, eyes scanning the crowd for a business opportunity, leaving his wife to stand alone before the altar. The pastor began to speak, his voice booming about the sanctity of a humble life, but Mary barely heard him. The isolation was absolute. She stood in the front row, a solitary figure in block, while behind her the murmurs of the Robbins family resumed, a low, buzzing drone of judgment and impatience. They thought this was the end of the story. They thought they were merely enduring one last tedious hour of association with a man they deemed beneath them. Mary looked at her father's face one last time, wiping a tear from her cheek. They had no idea that Ryan Vick had one last lesson to teach them, and the silence in the room was about to be broken by a voice much louder than grief.
The mahogany-paneled conference room of Sterling and Associates was aggressively quiet, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the chapel. The air conditioning here hummed with expensive efficiency, chilling the sweat on Mary's neck, though it did nothing to cool the burning indignation radiating from the woman seated across from her. Tanya Robbins drummed her manicured fingernails against the polished table, the click-clack sound echoing like gunshots in the silence. She had missed her reservation at Le Jardin, a tragedy she had mentioned 4 times in the 20-minute drive from the cemetery. "Is this absolutely necessary?" Tanya sighed, glaring at the empty leather chair at the head of the table. "I mean, really, Eric, we're sitting here for what? To inherit a 2004 Ford pickup and a collection of rusted wrenches? We could have had the lawyer mail the title. It's insulting to waste our time like this." Eric sat beside Mary, scrolling through emails on his phone, his posture slumped. "Mom, just let him read it. It's legal protocol. Once he's done, we can go grab a drink." He didn't look at Mary, didn't notice the way she was staring out the window at the gray city skyline, her mind still back in the chapel with the smell of carnations. "It's not just protocol, it's a farce," Tanya muttered, adjusting her silk scarf. "Ryan Vick was a nice enough man, in a blue-collar sort of way, but let's be realistic, he fixed things for a living. He probably left Mary a few $1,000s in a checking account and a mountain of medical bills. I just hope the debts don't transfer to us, Eric. Did you check on that? I will not have my credit score impacted because Mary's father didn't believe in financial planning." Mary opened her mouth to speak, to defend the man who had worked double shifts to put her through college without a dime of student loans, but the heavy oak door swung open before she could get the words out. Mr. Sterling, a man whose suit looked like it cost more than Mary's first car, walked in carrying a thick leather folio.
He was older, with silver hair and eyes that held the sharp, assessing look of a predator who had seen it all. He didn't apologize for the wait. He simply sat down, placed the folio on the table, and peered over his spectacles at the trio. "Mrs. Robbins," Sterling said, nodding to Mary. He ignored Tanya and Eric entirely. "My condolences on your loss. Your father was a remarkable man." Tanya let out a short, derisive snort. Remarkable is a strong word. He was consistent. Sterling's eyes flicked to Tanya, cold and unamused. "I see the extended family has joined us. Mr. Vick was quite specific that this meeting was for his daughter." "We are her family," Tanya interjected smoothly, leaning forward. "Eric is her husband, and I am the matriarch of this family. Anything that concerns Mary concerns us, especially financial burdens. We're here to ensure everything is handled appropriately." "I see," Sterling said, his voice dry. He opened the folio. "Well then, let us proceed. I will skip the standard preamble and move to the distribution of assets, as I have another meeting at 4. "Please do," Tanya said, checking her watch again. "The suspense is hardly killing us." Sterling began to read, his voice monotone and steady. "To my daughter, Mary, I leave my personal effects, the property at 42 Maple Lane, and the contents of my home." Tanya smirked at Eric. "There, the house. We'll have to hire a cleaning crew before we can sell it. It's probably full of grease." "Furthermore," Sterling continued, his volume rising slightly to cut over Tanya's commentary, "I leave the entirety of my financial holdings, which include the diversified portfolio held under the Vick Trust." "Portfolio?" Eric looked up, finally putting his phone down. "I thought he kept his money in a coffee can." Sterling turned a page, the paper crisp in the silence. Mr. Vick was not merely a machinist, as some might have assumed. In 1998, he developed a proprietary hydraulic valve system used in heavy industrial manufacturing. Rather than selling the patent outright, he retained ownership and licensed the technology to 3 of the largest automotive manufacturers in the world. He was also a silent seed investor in what is now known as Apex Logistics. The room went so quiet that the hum of the air conditioner sounded like a roar. Mary blinked, her brain struggling to process the words. She knew her dad tinkered. She knew he had projects, but patents? Licensing deals? What? Tanya's voice was a whisper, the smirk sliding off her face like oil. "The total valuation of the estate," Sterling said, looking directly at Tanya with a glint of satisfaction, "including liquid assets, stocks, and intellectual property royalties, is currently valued at $28,400,000. For a solid 10 seconds, nobody breathed. Mary felt the floor tilt. $28 million. The man who clipped coupons for coffee, who drove a truck until the wheels nearly fell off, who wore the same 3 flannel shirts for a decade. He had been sitting on an empire. He lived simply not because he had to, but because he wanted to, because he didn't care about the things Tanya Robbins lived for. 28, stammered Eric, his eyes wide, darting from the lawyer to Mary. Million? "Give or take a few $100,000, depending on the market close today," Sterling clarified casually, closing the folder. The transformation in the room was instant and grotesque. Tanya Robbins, who 10 minutes ago had been worried about inheriting debt, sat up straighter than she had ever done in her entire life. The disdain that had been etched in her features dissolved, replaced with a hungry, terrifying brightness. Her eyes, previously cold and dismissive, were now locked on Mary with a feverish intensity. "Oh my God," Tanya breathed, bringing a hand to her chest. $28 million. She turned to Mary, and the smile she plastered on her face was dazzling. It was the smile she reserved for gala donors and society photographers. "Mary, darling, did you hear that? I knew it. I always said Ryan was a genius. Didn't I say that, Eric? I always told you he had a brilliant mind for engineering." "You said he fixed engines," Mary said, her voice hollow. "Because he was humble," Tanya cried, reaching across the table to grab Mary's hand, the same hand she had refused to look at during the funeral. Her grip was tight, predatory. "He was a quiet genius. Oh, Mary, sweetheart, this changes everything. Do you realize what this means for us? For the family?" Eric was nodding, a flush rising in his cheeks. Mary, babe, wow. We can finally get out of that condo. We can look at the estates in Highland Park. The investment opportunities I've been looking at. This is exactly the capital we needed to get into the VC space. We need to get you a wealth management team immediately, Tanya interrupted, her mind already racing 3 steps ahead. My guy at Goldman is impossible to get into, but I can make a call. We have to protect this. The taxes alone will be a nightmare if we're not smart. We need to consolidate. Mary opened her mouth to speak, to defend the man who had worked double shifts to put her through college without a dime of student loans, but the heavy oak door swung open before she could get the words out. Mr. Sterling, a man whose suit looked like it cost more than Mary's first car, walked in carrying a thick leather folio. He was older, with silver hair and eyes that held the sharp, assessing look of a predator who had seen it all. He didn't apologize for the wait. He simply sat down, placed the folio on the table, and peered over his spectacles at the trio. Mrs. Robbins, Sterling said, nodding to Mary. He ignored Tanya and Eric entirely. My condolences on your loss. Your father was a remarkable man. Tanya let out a short, derisive snort. Remarkable is a strong word. He was consistent. Sterling's eyes flicked to Tanya, cold and unamused. I see the extended family has joined us. Mr. Vick was quite specific that this meeting was for his daughter. We are her family, Tanya interjected smoothly, leaning forward. Eric is her husband, and I am the matriarch of this family. Anything that concerns Mary concerns us, especially financial burdens. We're here to ensure everything is handled appropriately. I see, Sterling said, his voice dry. He opened the folio. Well then, let us proceed. I will skip the standard preamble and move to the distribution of assets, as I have another meeting at 4. Please do, Tanya said, checking her watch again. The suspense is hardly killing us. Sterling began to read, his voice monotone and steady. To my daughter, Mary, I leave my personal effects, the property at 42 Maple Lane, and the contents of my home. Tanya smirked at Eric. There, the house. We'll have to hire a cleaning crew before we can sell it. It's probably full of grease. Furthermore, Sterling continued, his volume rising slightly to cut over Tanya's commentary, I leave the entirety of my financial holdings, which include the diversified portfolio held under the Vick Trust. Portfolio? Eric looked up, finally putting his phone down. I thought he kept his money in a coffee can. Sterling turned a page, the paper crisp in the silence. Mr. Vick was not merely a machinist, as some might have assumed. In 1998, he developed a proprietary hydraulic valve system used in heavy industrial manufacturing. Rather than selling the patent outright, he retained ownership and licensed the technology to 3 of the largest automotive manufacturers in the world. He was also a silent seed investor in what is now known as Apex Logistics. The room went so quiet that the hum of the air conditioner sounded like a roar. Mary blinked, her brain struggling to process the words. She knew her dad tinkered. She knew he had projects, but patents? Licensing deals? What? Tanya's voice was a whisper, the smirk sliding off her face like oil. The total valuation of the estate, Sterling said, looking directly at Tanya with a glint of satisfaction, including liquid assets, stocks, and intellectual property. The invitation arrived before the ink on the lawyer's notepad was even dry. It wasn't a text, which was how Tanya usually communicated with Mary, brief, demanding commands about holiday schedules or dress codes for family events. This was a phone call, followed immediately by a courier-delivered orchid arrangement that was aggressively large, blocking the view of Mary's front door. The card, written in Tanya's sprawling, jagged calligraphy, read simply, Family first. Brunch at the conservatory, tomorrow at 10. Let us spoil you. Mary stared at the flowers. They were white orchids, rare and expensive, the exact opposite of the carnations Tanya had sneered at less than 24 hours ago. The whiplash was dizzying. For 7 years, Mary had been the project, the girl Eric had married despite her lack of pedigree, the daughter-in-law who was tolerated but never celebrated. Now, suddenly, she was someone to be spoiled. When Mary arrived at the conservatory the next morning, the scene was staged to perfection. It was the kind of restaurant where the menus had no prices and the water was poured from crystal decanters. Tanya and Eric were already seated at the best table on the patio, bathed in dappled sunlight. As soon as the maitre d' guided Mary toward them, Tanya practically leapt from her chair. "There she is," Tanya exclaimed, her voice pitching up into a register of delight that Mary had never heard before. "The woman of the hour. Come here, darling." Before Mary could brace herself, she was enveloped in a cloud of Chanel No. 5. Tanya hugged her, actually hugged her, pressing a cheek against Mary's with a familiarity that felt invasive. Eric stood up too, looking sheepish but polished in a polo shirt that accentuated his gym time. He pulled out her chair, a chivalrous gesture he hadn't performed since their third date. "You look tired, babe," Eric said, his hand lingering on her shoulder. "I told Mom we shouldn't have dragged you out so early, but she insisted." "Nonsense," Tanya waved a hand, signaling a waiter who appeared instantly with a bottle of champagne. "Mary needs family right now. She needs to be surrounded by people who love her. Sadness is terrible for the complexion, Mary, really. We need to get some color back in those cheeks." Mary sat, placing her handbag on her lap like a shield. "I'm okay," she said, her voice sounding small in the open air. "I'm just processing." "Of course you are," Tanya cooed, watching the waiter pour. "It's a lot. Losing a parent is devastating. And then the news from Mr. Sterling? Well, that's a different kind of shock, isn't it? A happy shock, but a shock nonetheless." She raised her flute. "To Ryan," she said, her eyes locking onto Mary's, "to a man of secrets and success." Mary hesitated, then touched her glass to theirs. The crystal chimed. "Yesterday you called him a simple man who fixed engines," Mary said, unable to stop the words from slipping out. Eric winced, taking a large gulp of his mimosa. Tanya didn't even blink. She set her glass down with a delicate click, her expression shifting into a mask of practiced solemnity. "Oh, Mary," Tanya sighed, reaching across the table to cover Mary's hand with her own. Her skin was cool and dry. "You have to forgive me. Grief does terrible things to people. I was angry that you were hurting, angry that the service wasn't worthy of him. I see that now. I lashed out because I wanted better for you and for him." She squeezed Mary's hand. "I realized something last night, thinking about what the lawyer said. Ryan wasn't simple. He was stoic. He had that, what is the phrase? That quiet dignity, the kind of old-world class that doesn't need to shout to be heard. I respect that immensely. I truly do." "Quiet dignity," Mary repeated. The phrase felt stolen. It was true, her father did have dignity, but hearing it coming from the mouth of a woman who mocked his flannel shirts for a decade felt like a violation. "Exactly," Tanya nodded vigorously. "He fooled us all, the clever fox. He built an empire right under everyone's noses. It takes a brilliant mind to do that. And you know, looking at you now, I see so much of him in you. You have that same reserve, that same hidden depth." Mary took a sip of water to wash down the bile rising in her throat. The revisionist history was breathtaking. Tanya was rewriting 7 years of condescension in real time, editing the narrative to fit the new balance sheet. "So," Eric cut in, leaning forward with an eagerness that made him look like a golden retriever waiting for a treat. "Mom had some great ideas this morning about the transition." "Transition?" Mary asked. "The estate," Tanya said, dropping her voice to a discreet, business-like whisper. "Managing that level of wealth is a full-time job, Mary. It's a burden, really. The tax liabilities, the investment strategies, the vultures who will come out of the woodwork asking for handouts. You need a 'fortress' around you, a family fortress." "We were thinking," Eric continued, leaning forward with an eagerness that made him look like a golden retriever waiting for a treat. "Mom had some great ideas this morning about the transition." "Transition?" Mary asked. "The estate," Tanya said, dropping her voice to a discreet, business-like whisper. "Managing that level of wealth is a full-time job, Mary. It's a burden, really. The tax liabilities, the investment strategies, the vultures who will come out of the woodwork asking for handouts. You need a fortress around you, a family fortress." We were thinking, Eric continued, leaning forward with an eagerness that made him look like a golden retriever waiting for a treat. Mom had some great ideas this morning about the transition. Transition? Mary asked. The estate, Tanya said, dropping her voice to a discreet, businesslike whisper. Managing that level of wealth is a full-time job, Mary. It's a burden, really. The tax liabilities, the investment strategies, the vultures who will come out of the woodwork asking for handouts. You need a fortress around you, a family fortress. We were thinking, Eric continued, leaning forward with an eagerness that made him look like a golden retriever waiting for a treat. Mom had some great ideas this morning about the transition. Transition? Mary asked. The estate, Tanya said, dropping her voice to a discreet, businesslike whisper. Managing that level of wealth is a full-time job, Mary. It's a burden, really. The tax liabilities, the investment strategies, the vultures who will come out of the woodwork asking for handouts. You need a fortress around you, a family fortress. We were thinking, Eric continued, leaning forward with an eagerness that made him look like a golden retriever waiting for a treat. Mom had some great ideas this morning about the transition. Transition? Mary asked. The estate, Tanya said, dropping her voice to a discreet, businesslike whisper. Managing that level of wealth is a full-time job, Mary. It's a burden, really. The tax liabilities, the investment strategies, the vultures who will come out of the woodwork asking for handouts. You need a fortress around you, a family fortress. We were thinking, Eric continued, leaning forward with an eagerness that made him look like a golden retriever waiting for a treat. Mom had some great ideas this morning about the transition. Transition? Mary asked. The estate, Tanya said, dropping her voice to a discreet, businesslike whisper. Managing that level of wealth is a full-time job, Mary. It's a burden, really. The tax liabilities, the investment strategies, the vultures who will come out of the woodwork asking for handouts. You need a fortress around you, a family fortress. We were thinking, Eric continued, leaning forward with an eagerness that made him look like a golden retriever waiting for a treat. Mom had some great ideas this morning about the transition. Transition? Mary asked. The estate, Tanya said, dropping her voice to a discreet, businesslike whisper. Managing that level of wealth is a full-time job, Mary. It's a burden, really. The tax liabilities, the investment strategies, the vultures who will come out of the woodwork asking for handouts. You need a fortress around you, a family fortress. We were thinking, Eric continued, leaning forward with an eagerness that made him look like a golden retriever waiting for a treat. Mom had some great ideas this morning about the transition. Transition? Mary asked. The estate, Tanya said, dropping her voice to a discreet, businesslike whisper. Managing that level of wealth is a full-time job, Mary. It's a burden, really. The tax liabilities, the investment strategies, the vultures who will come out of the woodwork asking for handouts. You need a fortress around you, a family fortress. We were thinking, Eric continued, leaning forward with an eagerness that made him look like a golden retriever waiting for a treat. Mom had some great ideas this morning about the transition. Transition? Mary asked. The estate, Tanya said, dropping her voice to a discreet, businesslike whisper. Managing that level of wealth is a full-time job, Mary. It's a burden, really. The tax liabilities, the investment strategies, the vultures who will come out of the woodwork asking for handouts. You need a fortress around you, a family fortress. We were thinking, Eric continued, leaning forward with an eagerness that made him look like a golden retriever waiting for a treat. Mom had some great ideas this morning about the transition. Transition? Mary asked. The estate, Tanya said, dropping her voice to a discreet, businesslike whisper. Managing that level of wealth is a full-time job, Mary. It's a burden, really. The tax liabilities, the investment strategies, the vultures who will come out of the woodwork asking for handouts. You need a fortress around you, a family fortress. We were thinking, Eric continued, leaning forward with an eagerness that made him look like a golden retriever waiting for a treat. Mom had some great ideas this morning about the transition. Transition? Mary asked. The estate, Tanya said, dropping her voice to a discreet, businesslike whisper. Managing that level of wealth is a full-time job, Mary. It's a burden, really. The tax liabilities, the investment strategies, the vultures who will come out of the woodwork asking for handouts.
The silence inside 42 Maple Lane was different from the silence at the brunch table. It wasn't heavy or expectant. It was patient. It smelled of sawdust, lemon polish, and the faint, lingering scent of Old Spice. Mary locked the front door behind her, leaning her forehead against the cool wood for a moment to steady her breathing. Tanya's perfume still clung to her clothes, a cloying reminder of the family fortress she was apparently now expected to bankroll. She walked through the hallway, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors her father had refinished himself 3 years ago. The house was modest, a 2-bedroom ranch that Tanya had once described as quaint in a desperate sort of way, but it was solid. Everything here was real. There were no veneers, no leased luxury cars in the driveway, no hollow promises. Mary made her way to the back of the house, to the room her father simply called the shop, though it was technically a study. This was where Vick had spent his evenings. Mary had always assumed he was balancing his checkbook or reading repair manuals. Now, knowing what she knew, the closed door felt like a portal to a stranger's life. She turned the brass knob and stepped inside. The room was exactly as he had left it. A drafting table dominated the corner, covered in schematics for hydraulic pumps. The walls were lined with metal filing cabinets, not the mahogany luxury of Sterling and Associates, but industrial gray steel. In the center sat his desk, a heavy, scarred oak beast he'd salvaged from a factory closing in the 90s. Mary sat in his creaky swivel chair, running her hand over the cool surface of the desk. She felt like an intruder. Quiet dignity, Tanya had called it. A genius. Mary snorted, a wet, unladylike sound. They didn't know him. They didn't deserve to know him. Her eyes landed on the bottom drawer of the desk. It was secured with a heavy-duty padlock, the kind used on shipping containers. Mary smiled through her tears. She knew the combination. It was her birthday, followed by the year he'd bought this house. 10/14/88. The lock clicked open with a satisfying snap. Mary pulled the drawer open, expecting to find deeds or maybe the patent documents Mr. Sterling had mentioned. Instead, there was a single, thick, expandable folder. It wasn't blue or manila, it was bright warning sign red. Taped to the front was a white envelope with her name written in his blocky, all-caps handwriting. For Mary, read this first. Her hands shook as she tore open the envelope. My dearest Mary, if you're reading this, I've gone on to the next place, and Mr. Sterling has dropped the bomb. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the money while I was here. I wanted to. A dozen times I almost did. But I saw how the Robbins family looked at you. I saw how they made you feel small so they could feel big. I knew that if they found out what I had, they wouldn't love you more. They'd just use you more. Mary wiped her eyes, her father's voice clear in her mind. I realized about 5 years ago that I couldn't just leave you an inheritance. I had to leave you a shield, and maybe a sword if you needed it. I hired a private investigator, Mary, not to spy on you, but to vet the people who claimed to be your family. I needed to know if my gut feeling about Tanya and Eric was right. It was. Mary's breath hitched. She reached into the red folder and pulled out the first stock of papers. It was a credit report. Her credit report. She scanned the lines, confusion knitting her brow. There were inquiries from banks she didn't bank with, loan applications for amounts that made her stomach turn, $50,000 here, $20,000 there, all dated 4 years ago, all stamped denied or flagged for fraud. She flipped the page and found a photocopy of a loan application for a luxury car lease. The applicant was Mary Robbins. The social security number was hers, but the signature at the bottom was a jagged, flamboyant scrawl that looked nothing like her own hand. It looked like Tanya's. Attached to the application was a note from a bank officer, a man Mary recognized as one of her father's old fishing buddies who worked at the local credit union. Ryan, you were right. Tanya Robbins tried to push this through using Mary's info. She claimed Mary was too busy to come in and sign. I blocked it as requested. Do you want to file police charges? Beneath it, in her father's handwriting, was the reply. No police, not yet. It would destroy Mary's marriage. Just block it and keep the record.
I'll pay off the balance on the card she managed to open. Put it in the file." Mary gasped, dropping the paper as if it were burning. Tanya had tried to steal her identity. She had tried to leverage Mary's clean credit to fund her lifestyle, and when she'd been caught, Ryan had quietly paid the debt to keep Mary from finding out, to keep Eric from being humiliated. She dug deeper into the folder. It was a dossier of cruelty. There were transcripts of voicemails Tanya had left for Eric when she thought Mary couldn't hear. "She's a sweet girl, Eric, but she's dead weight. Her father's a grease monkey. You need to marry someone who can help your career, not drag you down to the trailer park. I don't care if she doesn't want to take out a second mortgage, Eric. You're the husband. Make her sign the papers. We need that liquidity for the club dues." And then the final knife twist. A printout of an email chain between Tanya and a local real estate agent dated just 2 weeks ago, while Ryan was in the hospital. Subject: the Vick shock. From tanyar.robbins@robbinsestates.com. "As soon as the old man kicks the bucket, we'll be listing the Maple Lane property. It's a teardown, obviously. The daughter will do whatever I tell her. Just get the paperwork ready for a quick cash sale. I need the commission to cover the summer gala costs." Mary stared at the words. "As soon as the old man kicks the bucket." While Mary was holding her father's hand in the ICU, praying for one more day, Tanya was emailing a realtor to sell his home for scrap to pay for a party. The grief that had been paralyzing Mary for days suddenly evaporated. In its place, a cold, hard clarity settled in her chest. It was the same steel that had built her father's valves, the same unyielding strength he hid under flannel and silence. She wasn't just a grieving daughter anymore. She was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar estate, and she was holding the smoking gun. Mary carefully placed the papers back into the red folder. She closed the drawer, but she didn't lock it. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. The trembling in her hands had stopped. Tanya wanted a family fortress. She wanted to consolidate assets. She wanted Mary to move into the Highland Park estate. "Okay, Tanya," she whispered to the empty room, her voice echoing off the steel cabinets. "You want to play the rich widow game. Let's play." She picked up the red folder, tucked it under her arm, and walked out of the study. She didn't look back. The mourning period was over. The audit was about to begin.
The atmosphere in the Robbins' sleek, minimalist condo felt pressurized, like the cabin of an airplane rapidly losing altitude. Mary sat on the beige linen sofa, a book open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. She was watching Eric pace. He had been home for an hour, and in that time he had poured himself 3 scotches, reorganized the coffee table books, and asked her how she was feeling 6 different times. It was a performance of domestic solicitude so clumsy it would have been funny if the stakes weren't so high. Mary knew exactly what was coming. The only variable was the price tag. "So," Eric said, stopping in front of the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city lights they could barely afford to live amongst. He took a long sip of his drink. "I was talking to Mom again, about the transition." Mary didn't look up. How is she?" "Stressed," Eric said quickly, too quickly. "She's worried about you, obviously. And she's trying to move some assets around to free up capital for this family office idea. She thinks we need to strike while the iron is hot. The market is volatile, Mary. If we leave your father's portfolio sitting in those stagnant accounts, we're losing money every second. Inflation is eating it alive." He turned to face her, his eyes wide and earnest. It was the same look he'd given her when he proposed, the same look he used when he wanted to skip dinner with her parents to go to a boat show. "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about," he continued, loosening his tie as he sat on the ottoman in front of her. He leaned in, invading her space with the smell of expensive scotch and desperation. "There's an opportunity, a bridge situation. One of the partners at the firm has a distressed commercial property in the financial district. It's a steal, Mary, but the window closes on Friday. We need liquidity." "Liquidity," Mary repeated, testing the word. It sounded slippery. "Exactly. Just a short-term injection, seed money to secure the deed.
Then we flip it or refinance and we triple the initial investment within 6 months. It's a no-brainer. He paused, wetting his lips. We'd need about $400,000 by Thursday morning. Mary looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. She saw the tremor in his hand holding the glass. She knew, with the certainty of the red folder sitting in her father's desk across town, that there was no commercial property. There was no deal. There was only Tanya Robbins, drowning in debt, needing a lifeline to keep the lights on at her glossy, leveraged estate. $400,000, Mary said calmly. That's a lot of money, Eric. It's peanuts compared to the estate, Eric laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound. Mary, the trust is worth nearly $30 million. It's like buying a cup of coffee. And it proves to the bank that we're serious players. It proves to to the industry, that we know how to leverage our position. He reached out, placing his hand on her knee. I sent the wire instructions to your email. You just need to forward them to Mr. Sterling in the morning and authorize the transfer. I'll handle the rest. I'll make us a fortune, babe. I promise. Mary carefully closed her book. She picked it up and set it on the side table, creating a small, deliberate distance between them. I can't do that, Eric. Eric blinked, his smile faltering. What? Babe, I know it's fast, but I've done the due diligence. I'm a finance professional. You have to trust me. It's not about trust, Mary lied effortlessly. She was learning that lying to liars wasn't a sin. It was a strategy. It's about the will. I finally got a chance to read the full trust instrument Mr. Sterling gave me. Eric's brow furrowed. What do you mean? It's your money. You're the sole beneficiary. You can do whatever you want with it. Actually, I can't. Mary stood up and walked to the kitchen island, putting the marble countertop between them. She needed the barrier. Dodd didn't just leave me the money in a lump sum. He placed the entire estate into a dynasty trust with a spendthrift clause. Eric stood up slowly, the color draining from his face. A spendthrift clause? That's for children or addicts. Why would he do that? He wanted to ensure the legacy lasted, Mary said, reciting the explanation she had rehearsed in her head. Mr. Sterling is the independent trustee. I can request distributions for health, education, or maintenance, but I don't have access to the principal, and I certainly can't authorize a $500,000 wire transfer for a speculative real estate deal without the trustee's approval. Then get his approval, Eric cried, his voice cracking with panic. Call him. Tell him it's for a home renovation or medical bills. Tell him whatever you have to tell him. I can't lie to the trustee. That's fraud. It's not fraud. It's our money, Eric shouted, slamming his hand onto the back of the sofa. The violence of the gesture startled them both. He took a breath, trying to reel it in, but the mask was slipping. Mary, listen to me. This deal, it's important for my career. If I don't come through with the capital, I look like an idiot. Mom is counting on... He stopped. Mom is counting on what? Mary asked softly. Eric looked away, his jaw working. She's counting on us stepping up, on us being partners. There's something else, Mary added, delivering the coup de grace. The trust explicitly references the prenuptial agreement. Eric froze. The prenuptial? Yes, the one your mother insisted I signed 3 weeks before the wedding, remember? She said it was to protect your future family assets from my family's debts. Eric sighed. He remembered. He had sat in the room while Tanya bullied Mary into signing a document that waived her right to any of the Robbins' wealth, ensuring that what was separate remained separate. Well, Mary continued, her voice light, almost conversational, the trust honors the prenup's definition of separate property. My inheritance is categorized as a non-marital asset. If I were to commingle those funds, say, by investing in a business deal with my husband, it would violate the terms of the trust and trigger an automatic freeze on all distributions. She poured herself a glass of water, watching him crumble. It's ironic, isn't it? If Tanya hadn't been so worried about me stealing your money, I might be able to help you now. But she made the rules. Dad just followed them. Eric stared at her, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a man who had walked into a glass door. The business opportunity wasn't just dead, it was buried under a mountain of ironclad legalese that his own mother had constructed. "So," Eric whispered, his voice hoarse, "you can't get the money." "Not a dime for this, Eric. I'm sorry." He stared at the floor, his mind clearly racing to the phone call he would have to make to Tanya. He would have to tell her that the $400,000 she needed, likely to cover a margin call or a balloon payment, was sitting in a vault she helped lock up. "I have to go," Eric muttered, grabbing his keys off the counter. "Go? It's 9 o'clock. Where are you going?" "I have to go to the office," he lied, unable to meet her eyes. "I have to cancel the deal." Mary watched him rush out the door, the heavy slam echoing through the condo. She took a sip of water, cool and refreshing. She knew exactly where he was going. He was going to Tanya's. And for the first time in 7 years, Mary wasn't afraid of what they would say about her. She was looking forward to it.
The digital clock on the bedside table read 2:14 a.m., casting a sickly green glow across the empty side of the mattress. Mary lay perfectly still, her eyes adjusted to the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator through the thin walls of the luxury condo. She hadn't slept. She had spent the last 5 hours staring at the ceiling, replaying the look on Eric's face when she told him the money was locked away. She knew he would come back eventually. Eric was a creature of habit, and his habit was retreat. The sound of the key card in the electronic lock beeped, followed by the heavy thud of the front door. Mary didn't move. She controlled her breathing, feigning the deep, rhythmic respiration of deep sleep. She heard his footsteps, heavy, uneven, dragging, as he moved past the bedroom door and into the living room. He didn't come to check on her. He went straight for the liquor cabinet. The clink of glass against glass was sharp in the silence. Then his phone buzzed. It wasn't a ring, he had it on vibrate, but on the glass coffee table it sounded like an angry hornet. "I'm here," Eric's voice hissed, a harsh whisper that cut through the hallway. "I'm home. She's asleep." Mary slid out of bed. Her bare feet made no sound on the plush carpet. She crept toward the bedroom door, which she had left cracked open a fraction of an inch specifically for this moment. She pressed her ear to the gap. "I tried, Mom," Eric said, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "I told you. She read the trust. She knows about the prenup. She cited the specific clause, for God's sakes. It's ironclad." There was a pause, and then Mary could hear Tanya's voice. She wasn't on speakerphone, but she was screaming so loudly that the tinny distortion bled into the room. Mary couldn't make out every word, but the tone was unmistakable, pure, unadulterated rage. "Fix it!" Tanya's shrill command was audible enough for Eric to flinch. He pulled the phone away from his ear for a second before bringing it back. "How am I supposed to fix it?" Eric argued, his whisper turning into a desperate hiss. "Sterling is the trustee. If I try to move that money without her signature, it's grand larceny. Do you want me to go to jail?" Tanya's voice rose again, a jagged stream of noise. Mary held her breath, leaning closer. She needed to hear this. She reached into her pajama pocket and pulled out her phone, tapping the voice memo app. She hit record and held it near the door crack. "Stop being a coward, Eric." Tanya's voice came through clearer now as Eric paced closer to the hallway. "We are talking about the estate. We are talking about my reputation. The bridge loan on the Highland Park house is due in 48 hours. If we default, they'll put a foreclosure sign on the lawn before the gala even starts. Do you understand what that will do to us? We'll be pariahs." I know, Eric groaned, rubbing his temples. But Mary said, "I don't care what Mary said. Mary is a mousy little nobody who got lucky. She doesn't understand finance. She doesn't understand legacy. She's just a useful idiot, Eric. That's all she's ever been. You married her because she was safe, and now she's the only thing standing between us and ruin. So make her useful." A useful idiot.
The words hit Mary with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her. It wasn't that she hadn't suspected they felt this way. The red folder in her father's desk had confirmed their disdain, but hearing it spoken aloud in the middle of the night by the woman who had hugged her at brunch that morning was different. It solidified the ice in her veins. "I'm not sure," Eric weakened, his voice sounding like a petulant child. "She's different. Ever since the funeral, she's cold. I think she suspects something." "She doesn't suspect a thing," Tanya scoffed. "She's grieving. She's emotional. Use that, Eric. Guilt her. Tell her it's for me. Tell her I'm sick. Tell her the stress is killing me. My God, do I have to script this for you? Cry if you have to. Get her to sign a power of attorney just in case something happens to her, and then we can handle the trustee ourselves." Mary's grip on her phone tightened. Fraud. They were actively conspiring to commit fraud. Tanya wasn't just desperate, she was criminal. "I don't know," Eric wavered. "Mr. Sterling is watching everything." "Mr. Sterling is a service provider," Tanya snapped. "He works for whoever signs the checks. Once we have control of the trust, we fire him and hire someone who understands how the real world works. Just get the girl on board. Break her down, Eric. Remind her that she has nobody else. Her father is dead. We are her only family. Make her feel that. Make her terrified of losing us." Eric was silent for a long moment. Mary waited, a tiny, foolish part of her hoping he would defend her, hoping he would tell his mother that his wife wasn't a pawn, that he actually loved her. "Okay," Eric said finally, his voice flat. "I'll try again in the morning. I'll tell her you're in the hospital, chest pains. Maybe that'll shake her up." "Good," Tanya's tone instantly clipped back to business. "Call an ambulance if you have to. Make it real. Just get that money released by Friday. And Eric? Yeah? Don't let that little rural mechanic's daughter outsmart you. It's embarrassing." The line went dead. Eric lowered the phone, standing motionless in the dark living room for a long time. Mary watched through the crack as he walked to the window, staring out at the city he couldn't afford, trapped in a life he hadn't earned. He took another long swallow of scotch, draining the glass. Mary stopped the recording. She saved the file, naming it simply "Useful Idiot." She slipped back into bed, pulling the duvet up to her chin. Her heart was pounding, not with fear, but with adrenaline. They wanted to play games with guilt. They wanted to use her father's death as a lever to pry open his bank account. They wanted to fake a medical emergency to manipulate her. Fine. Mary closed her eyes, visualizing the scene that would play out in the morning. Eric would come in with his concerned husband face. He would spin a lie about Tanya's heart. He would ask for the money again, begging her to save his mother's life. And Mary would be ready. She wouldn't just say no. She would invite them to dinner. If Tanya wanted a performance, Mary would give her the closing night of a lifetime.
The dining room table was set with the precision of a surgical instrument tray. There was no food, only coasters, a pitcher of ice water, and a single thick manila envelope resting at Mary's seat. Tanya Robbins swept in at 7 o'clock sharp, leaning heavily on Eric's arm. For a woman who had supposedly suffered a near-fatal cardiac episode that very morning, her recovery was nothing short of miraculous. She wore a pale cashmere wrap and held a hand to her chest, offering a brave, trembling smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mary, dear," Tanya whispered, sinking into the chair Eric pulled out for her. "Thank you for seeing us. The doctor said I should be resting, but I told him my family needs me. Stress is a silent killer, you know, but knowing we can finally resolve this, well, it's the best medicine." Eric hovered behind her, looking like a man walking to the gallows. He caught Mary's eye and gave a quick, pleading nod, the universal signal for "please just sign the papers and make this stop." Mary sat at the head of the table. She didn't smile. She didn't offer sympathy. She simply folded her hands on top of the envelope. "I'm glad you're feeling better, Tanya.
Mary said, her voice devoid of warmth. Eric told me about the chest pains. It must have been terrifying. It was, Eric interjected quickly, pulling out his own chair. But the prognosis is good, as long as we reduce her stress levels immediately. Right, stress, Mary repeated. Like the stress of a 48-hour deadline on a bridge loan for a house you can't afford. The air in the room vanished. Tanya froze in the middle of reaching for her water glass. Eric's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stopped moving. I don't know what you're talking about, Tanya said, recovering her composure with a sharp laugh. Bridge loan? Mary, you really shouldn't try to speak about finance. You get confused so easily. Do I? Open the envelope. She didn't slide the papers across the table. She laid them out one by one, like tarot cards predicting a disaster. The first was the foreclosure notice for the Highland Park estate, dated 3 days ago. The second was a printout of Tanya's credit score, currently sitting in the low 500s. The third was the police report Ryan Vick had filed but never pursued regarding the fraudulent car loan application from 4 years ago. I think I understand finance perfectly well, Mary said, her eyes locking onto Tanya's. I understand that you aren't wealthy, Tanya. You're insolvent. You've been borrowing against the equity in your properties to pay the interest on other loans for 5 years. It's a Ponzi scheme, and the only investor left is me. Tanya stared at the documents, her face draining of color until it matched her cashmere wrap. She looked at Eric, then back at Mary, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. Where did you get these? Eric whispered, staring at the police report with his mother's signature on it. Mom, is this true? Did you try to take out a loan in Mary's name? It was a misunderstanding, Tanya snapped, her voice shrill. Your father-in-law was a vindictive little man who didn't understand how leverage works. I was trying to help build your credit score, Mary. I was trying to do you a favor. By committing identity theft? Mary asked, calmly. Is that the same favor you were doing when you emailed your realtor 2 weeks ago calling my father's home a teardown while I was sitting by his deathbed? She placed the email printout on top of the pile. Tanya flinched as if she'd been slapped. We were trying to be practical, Tanya cried, abandoning the sick old lady act entirely. She sat up straight, her eyes blazing with cornered fury. Someone has to be. You sit there with your $30 million that you didn't earn, judging us. We are the ones who introduced you to society. We are the ones who gave you a name worth having. And now when we hit a momentary liquidity crunch, you treat us like criminals. You are criminals, Mary corrected. Or at least you're trying to be. You wanted me to commit fraud against the trust. You wanted me to sign a power of attorney so you could drain the account. We are family, Eric shouted, slamming his hand on the table. God, Mary, stop acting like this. So what if things are tight right now? We're married. You're supposed to help me. You're supposed to stand by us. I did stand by you, Mary said, softly. For 7 years. I stood by you when your mother made fun of my clothes. I stood by you when you forgot my birthday to go to a networking event. I stood by you yesterday at the funeral when you left me alone to shake hands with a VP. That's in the past, Eric waved his hand dismissively. We're talking about right now. We need the money, Mary. If we don't pay the bank by tomorrow, we lose the house. We lose everything. Is that what you want? To see your husband on the street? Mary looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the sweat on his brow, the weakness in his chin, the utter lack of spine. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. I wondered that too, Mary said. I wondered if I was being too harsh. I wondered if maybe, deep down, you really loved me and were just scared. She tapped the screen. The audio recording was crisp and clear in the silent dining room. Mary is a mousy little nobody who got lucky. She's just a useful idiot, Eric. That's all she's ever been. Tanya gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Then Eric's voice filled the room. I'll tell her she's in the hospital, chest pains. Maybe that'll shake her up. Mary stopped the recording. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Eric looked like he wanted to vomit. Tanya looked at the phone as if it were a bomb that had just detonated. I'm not a useful idiot, Eric, and I'm not a bridge loan. I'm the trustee of my own life now. She stood up, gathering the papers back into the envelope. There will be no check, there will be no transfer, and there will certainly be no power of attorney. Mary, please, Eric whimpered, sliding out of his chair to his knees. It was a pathetic sight. Please, it was just talk. She was upset. I didn't mean it. I love you. Get up, Mary said, looking down at him with nothing but pity. You don't love me. You love the safety I provided, and now you love the money you think I can give you. She looked at Tanya, who was sitting frozen, staring at the table. My father called you a black hole. He said there was no amount of money that would ever fill the empty space inside you where your character should be. He was right. Mary walked to the front door of the condo and opened it wide. Get out, she said to Tanya. This is my son's home, Tanya hissed, trying to regain a shred of dignity. Actually, Mary said, glancing at the foreclosure notice she had left on the table, technically, the bank owns the lease on this condo too, since Eric co-signed the Highland Park loan with it as collateral, but for tonight, I'm the one paying the utilities. Get out. Tanya stood up, shaking with rage. She marched to the door, pausing only to glare at Mary. You'll regret this. You'll be alone, Mary. No connections. You'll just be a lonely woman with a checkbook. I'd rather be alone with a checkbook than surrounded by people who hate me. Tanya stormed out. Eric remained on the floor, looking between his wife and the open door. Mary, Eric started. You can stay tonight, Mary said coldly, on the couch. But tomorrow you're going to need to find a new place to live. I suggest you ask your mother if she has room in her future accommodations. She closed the door, locking it with a decisive click. The tribunal was adjourned.
The morning sun that filtered into the condo was merciless, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the frantic, bloodshot exhaustion in Eric's eyes. He hadn't slept. The couch cushions were thrown askew, a testament to a night of tossing and turning. He sat at the kitchen island now, nursing a lukewarm lug of coffee, flinching every time Mary set a spoon down on the counter. The doorbell rang at 9 o'clock sharp. Eric jumped as if he'd been electrocuted. He looked at the door, then at Mary, panic flaring in his chest. I didn't call her, he stammered, his voice thick with sleep. I swear, Mary, I didn't. I did, Mary said, calmly, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She walked past him, her stride steady and purposeful. I told her to be here. We need witnesses for what happens next. She opened the door to find Tanya Robbins standing in the hallway. The older woman looked as if she had aged 10 years overnight. Her signature blowout was slightly flat, her makeup applied with a heavier hand than usual to cover the dark circles of a sleepless night. She wore large sunglasses, hiding her eyes, but her mouth was set in a tight, grim line. Tanya, Mary said, her voice lacking its usual musical condescension. It was brittle, like dry leaves. I'm here to collect my son. We won't be staying where we aren't wanted. Come in, Tanya, Mary said, stepping aside. Eric isn't packed yet, and we have business to conclude. Tanya hesitated, suspicion radiating off her, but she stepped inside, clutching her handbag tightly. She saw Eric at the counter and let out a small, dramatic sigh. Oh, my poor boy, look at you, treated like a refugee in your own home. Sit down, Mary commanded. It wasn't a request. She pointed to the chair opposite Eric. Tanya bristled but sat, keeping her sunglasses on. Mary walked to the living room sideboard and picked up a thick manila envelope and a rectangular slip of paper. She returned to the island and placed them side by side on the marble countertop, directly in front of her husband.
"What is this?" Eric asked, staring at the paperwork without touching it. "This," Mary said, topping the thick stock, "is a petition for an uncontested divorce. My lawyer drafted it overnight. It grants you no alimony, no claim to the Vick estate, and a clean break. It cites irreconcilable differences, which is a polite way of saying financial infidelity and emotional abuse." Eric flinched. "Divorce? Mary, stop. We can work this out. I told you last night I love you. I made a mistake. People make mistakes." "And this," Mary continued, ignoring his plea as she topped the slip of paper, "is a cashier's check, drawn from my personal savings, not the trust. It's for $50,000. Tanya's head snapped up. Even through the dark lenses, Mary could feel the woman's eyes locking on to the numbers. $50,000. To the Tanya of yesterday, it was pocket change. To the Tanya of today, facing foreclosure and bankruptcy, it was a lifeline. It was oxygen. "I don't understand," Eric whispered, looking between the check and the divorce papers. "It's a choice, Eric," Mary said, leaning forward, her voice soft but unyielding. "You have two options right now. Option A, we stay married. You refuse to sign the papers, we go to counseling, we try to work it out. But know this, if we stay married, the trust remains locked. The prenup stands. You will never ever touch a penny of my father's money. I will not pay off your mother's debts. I will not bail out the Highland Park house. We will live in this condo until the bank takes it, and then we will move into a rental that I can afford on my own salary. You will be married to me, but you will be poor." She paused, letting the reality of that future sink in. She watched Eric's throat work as he swallowed. "Option B," Mary said, sliding the check an inch closer to him, "you sign the papers right now. You walk away. You take this check, which is enough to put a deposit on a new apartment and pay for a good moving crew. You get a fresh start. No debts to me, no fighting. You leave and you take your mother with you." The silence in the kitchen was deafening. The refrigerator hummed, a car horn honked somewhere on the street below. Eric stared at the papers. "You're buying me off?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of insult and intrigue. "I'm paying a severance package. Think of it as a termination fee for a failed merger." "I can't believe you," Tanya hissed, yet her eyes kept drifting back to the check. "You think you can just buy my son? He has dignity, Mary. He loves you. He's not going to throw away his marriage for a pittance. $50,000 clears the interest payments on your credit cards for 3 months, Tanya," Mary said without looking at her. "It buys you time to sell the jewelry before the repo men come." Tanya's mouth snapped shut. Eric looked up at Mary, tears welling in his eyes. "Babe, please, I don't want the money. I want us. We were happy once. Remember our honeymoon? Remember the cabin?" "I remember," Mary said, feeling a faint ache in her chest that she quickly suppressed. "I remember that you spent 3 days of our honeymoon on the phone with your mother. I remember that you made me pay for the rental car because your card was maxed out. I remember a lot of things, Mary, but mostly, I remember that when it came down to it, you chose her over me. Every single time." "That's not true." "Prove it," Mary challenged. She pointed to the divorce papers. "If you want to be my husband, tear up the check. Push the papers away. Tell your mother to leave and tell her she's on her own financially. Tell her you're staying with me in a 1-bedroom apartment if necessary because you love me more than you love the lifestyle she promised you." Eric stared at her. The challenge hung in the air, absolute and terrifying. He looked at the check, $50,000. It was real. It was right there. Then he looked at the idea of a life without money. A life of budgeting, of coupons, of his mother's disappointment, of being cut off from the illusion of grandeur he had chased since birth. He turned his head slowly. He didn't look at Mary. He looked at Tanya. It was a reflex as natural as breathing. He looked to his mother for permission. He looked for the script. Tanya took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were hard, calculating, and utterly devoid of maternal warmth. She looked at the check, then at her son. She gave a single, imperceptible nod. "Take the money." The gesture broke Mary's heart for the final time, but it also set her free. Eric let out a shuddering breath. He picked up the pen lying next to the papers. He didn't look at Mary again. His hand shook as he signed his name on the line marked Respondent. The scratch of the pen against the paper sounded like a key turning in a lock. He finished the signature and reached out, his fingers closing around the check. "I'm sorry, Mary. I really am," he whispered, standing up. "I know," Mary said, picking up the signed papers and sliding them into her folder. "You're sorry the ride is over." Tanya stood up immediately, snatching the check from Eric before he could even look at it properly. She tucked it into her purse with the speed of a magician. "Come on, Eric," Tanya said, her voice regaining a shred of its old imperiousness now that she had secured a victory, however small. "This place is stifling anyway." She marched to the door, not looking back. Eric lingered for a second, looking at Mary one last time. He looked like a child who had lost his balloon, pathetic and confused by his own choices. "Goodbye, Eric," Mary said. He turned and walked out the door, following the click-clock of his mother's heels just as he had for his entire life. Mary closed the door behind them. She turned the deadbolt. Then she walked back to the kitchen, poured the cold coffee down the sink, and took a deep breath. The condo was quiet. It was empty, and for the first time in 7 years, it was entirely hers.
The autumn wind swept through the cemetery, scattering gold and crimson leaves across the manicured grass, but Mary Robbins didn't feel the chill. She adjusted her scarf, a soft, high-quality wool that she had bought simply because she liked the texture, not because it had a logo, and walked up the familiar path. It had been exactly 365 days since she stood here in the sweltering heat, surrounded by people who viewed her grief as an inconvenience. The silence today was different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of isolation. It was the crisp, clean silence of peace. Mary reached the granite headstone and smiled. It was clean, dignified, and surrounded by a vibrant bed of hardy, cheerful marigolds, her father's favorite, though Tanya had once called them gas station flowers. Mary knelt, brushing a stray leaf from the engraved letters. Ryan Vick, beloved father, quiet genius. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. "I brought you some news." The news wasn't about her, though there was plenty to tell. The Ryan Vick Foundation was fully operational, funding trade school scholarships for kids who, like her father, had brilliance in their hands. She had kept the house on Maple Lane, renovating the kitchen exactly the way he had always planned to, and she spent her weekends there, reading in the sunroom, free from the noise of pretension. No, the news was about the empire of cards that had finally, spectacularly collapsed. Mr. Sterling had called her yesterday for their quarterly review. His voice, usually dry as parchment, had held a rare note of grim satisfaction. The foreclosure on the Robbins Highland Park estate had been finalized on Tuesday. The bank hadn't been interested in Tanya's social standing or her stories about temporary liquidity issues. They simply wanted their money. When the gavel fell at the auction, the house sold for a fraction of what Tanya claimed it was worth, barely covering the outstanding liens. Tanya Robbins, the woman who had terrorized waitstaff and mocked Mary's lineage, was now living in a one-bedroom apartment in a complex near the highway. The gossip mill, which Tanya had fed for decades, had turned on her with predatory glee. The rumor was she had been quietly asked to resign from the Botanical Garden Board after her check for the annual gala table bounced. And Eric. Mary stood up, dusting off her knees. She didn't feel anger when she thought of him anymore. The rage had burned itself out months ago, leaving behind only a dull, distant pity. She had heard through a mutual acquaintance, one of the few real friends she had managed to keep from her old life, that Eric was single. The $50,000 Mary had given him had vanished within 3 months, absorbed into the black hole of Tanya's desperate attempts to maintain appearances. He was currently working as a junior sales associate at a mid-tier leasing firm, a job he once sneered at as beneath him. He drove a leased sedan, lived in a studio apartment with paper-thin walls, and spent his weekends alone. He had tried to call Mary once, about 6 months ago. It was late on a Friday night, the universal time for lonely regrets. Mary stared at his name on her screen, the letters illuminating the dark room. She remembered the way he had looked at his mother for permission to divorce her. She remembered the useful idiot recording. She hadn't declined the call, she had simply blocked the number, set her phone on the nightstand, and gone back to sleep. "You were right about the sword, Dodd," Mary said to the headstone, her voice carried away by the gentle wind.
She looked out over rows of graves toward the city skyline in the distance. Somewhere in that concrete maze, Eric and Tanya were scrambling, blaming the world, blaming the banks, probably still blaming her. They were trapped in a prison of their own making, a cell built of ego and greed. Mary, however, was standing in the open air. She had no debts. She had no master. She had a legacy that was actually real, built on hard work and patents, not credit and condescension. She touched the cold stone one last time. I miss you, but I'm okay. I'm really okay. As she turned to leave, a gust of wind kicked up, swirling the leaves around her feet in a playful dance. It felt like a pat on the back. Mary walked back to her car, her father's restored vintage truck, which rumbled with a satisfying, powerful growl when she turned the key. She checked her mirrors, put the truck in gear, and drove out of the cemetery gates. She didn't look back at the grave, and she certainly didn't look back at the past. The road ahead was wide open, and for the first time in her life, Mary Robbins was the only one behind the wheel.